Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's wellness session. Today, I'm going to start a series on grief and loss. And because grief can impact social emotional development and learning, today I'm going to focus on how to support students who are grieving the loss of a family member or close friend. The strategies that I'm going to share in today's session are particularly useful for school faculty and staff when they become aware of a student who's experienced the loss of a family member or a close friend. The first strategy is to open the door for communication. So ask the individual if they want to talk about it. Don't push or force them to talk about it, as they may not be ready to talk yet. Children, adolescents, and teens may prefer to be alone or for a little bit, or to even just spend time with their friends, or even talk to their friends about it first. Sometimes they may feel the safest talking to a teacher or other school staff member, especially if the loss has also affected their parent or guardian or other family members. They may not want to talk to them about how they feel about the loss, as their family member may also be impacted a great deal by the loss. So it's okay if they decline the offer to talk. Just by opening the door, you've let them know that at any point, if they become ready or if they decide to talk, they know who they can go to. It is also important to acknowledge that it is difficult to discuss the loss of a friend or family member, but that both children and adults find it helpful when they do talk to someone about it. It may also be useful to help students identify other adults that they would feel comfortable talking to. Continue to offer to talk from time to time. Be prepared for difficult questions. Some of these you may not have the answers to or know the answers to. That's okay. The important thing is to be honest. Just let them know that you don't really know why that happened or how that happened, or if they'll even ever get the answer to that question. The most important thing is for you to be present and be attentive as they share about the loss with you and express their feelings with you. Remember, it is not your questions or the topic of death that's upsetting for the student, but the actual loss of the relationship the student had with the deceased family member or close friend. Research indicates that children, adolescents, and teens experience difficulty grieving alone or in isolation. So don't hesitate to get involved and just ask them how they're doing. The goals of the conversation are to allow opportunities for the student to express their feelings surrounding their grief and loss, not to actually take away the pain or the grief. Another goal is just to listen more and talk less. Avoid trying to cheer up the student by talking about other things or shifting the focus away from their grief. Be accepting of any of the emotions that they do express while talking to you, and just show empathy, letting them know that you're there for them and you understand why they're having such a hard time. This may also be a good time to share any resources that you're aware of, or to let the student know what kind of resources are available in your building, whether it be the school counselor, a school social worker, or even if there's a grief group available that the student would be able to attend. If you're looking for resources, there are some provided in the description of this video. Now that we've talked about some tips and strategies for how to have a conversation with our students that are experiencing the loss of a family member or close friend, I want to share with you some things to try to avoid in these conversations and some things that you can say instead. I'm going to be sharing some examples from a list shared by the Coalition for the Coalition to Support Grieving Students. All right, the first one is don't say this. I know just what you're going through. And the reason behind not saying that is because you don't know what the person's going through, because everyone experiences grief differently. Instead, say this. Can you tell me more about what this has been like for you? The next one is don't say this. You must be incredibly angry. It's not a good idea to tell people what they're feeling or what they should be feeling. It's much better to actually ask them what they're feeling, because again, everyone experiences grief differently. So say this instead. Most people have strong feelings when something like this happens to them. What has this been like for you? The next, don't say this. This is hard, but it's important to remember the good things in life too. And the rationale behind not saying this is this kind of statement is likely to quiet down the true expressions of grief. So try to say this instead. What kinds of memories do you have about the person who died? The next, don't say this. At least he's no longer in pain. And the rationale here is efforts to focus on the good things are more likely to minimize the student or family's experience. Any statement that begins with the words "at least" should probably be reconsidered. So we want to try to avoid any phrases that begin with "at least." And instead, say this. What sorts of things have you been thinking about since your loved one died? Don't say this. I lost both of my parents when I was your age. Avoid comparing your losses with those of students or their families. These types of statements may leave children feeling that their loss is not as profound or important. So say this instead. Tell me more about what this has been like for you. Don't say this. You'll need to be strong now for your family. It's important to get a grip on what you're feeling. And the rationale here is grieving children are often told they shouldn't express their feeling. This holds children back from expressing their grief and learning to cope with these difficult feelings. So say this instead. How is your family doing? What kinds of concerns do you have about them? It's okay if you've said some of these statements that were in the don't say this category before. Children are very forgiving, and that's not necessarily something that they would remember. But moving forward, I challenge you to try to avoid some of these common statements that we all are guilty of using when we're having conversations with people who have just experienced loss. So I challenge you to try to utilize some of the say this instead statements that I shared with you in this segment. In addition to the information that you gather from students in your conversation, you may also learn from the behaviors that the grieving student demonstrates. Here are some things that you may notice. You may notice a decline in academic performance, as the grief and stress that the student is experiencing is impairing their ability to concentrate. Or you may even notice some new behaviors. For instance, even the opposite of what I just said. Maybe you might notice an improvement in academic performance or an improvement in attendance as a student is really just focusing all of their time and energy into their work and school. as an escape from expressing their feelings related to the grief. You may also notice some behaviors, like maybe some immature or selfish behaviors, again, as a result of the grief and stress that they're feeling, or maybe even some aggression or irritability. So if you start to notice any of these behaviors or any significant changes in behaviors from what you're used to seeing with the student prior to the student experiencing the loss, if anything concerns you, I encourage you to involve their parents or caregivers. Let them know what you're seeing and what kind of behaviors that you're concerned with, and ask them what they're seeing at home. You may also want to consider convening a team meeting comprised of both the teachers and the parents and caregivers to come up with a support plan for the student, particularly if they need some learning supports at school, or just to talk about what the student needs at the time and maybe develop a plan to help meet those needs. As stated earlier in this video, everyone grieves differently and everyone experiences grief in unique ways. This can be a very difficult, painful, and confusing time for students. The most important thing that you can do is just be present and attentive while allowing for opportunities for them to talk to you. And again, just share any resources that you have available. We have linked some additional resources in the description of this video. I hope you'll stay tuned for our upcoming sessions as we talk about how parents can support grieving children and how peers can support grieving friends. Thank you for joining today's session, and I hope you'll stay tuned for our upcoming sessions.